At 02:17 hours, the desert air shattered. The first explosion rolled across Fort Redstone like a suppressed scream, deep, metallic, wrong. It wasn't loud the way movies made explosions loud. It was heavy, a concussion that punched into concrete and traveled through bone before sound ever reached the ears. Captain Elise Kincaid froze mid-step. For half a second, her mind refused to accept what her body already knew. That wasn't training. That wasn't an accident. That was incoming fire. The second blast came closer, rattling the glass of the administrative building and triggering alarms that screamed into the night, long, rising howls that tore soldiers from bunks and snapped the base into emergency rhythm. Elise turned, already moving, already issuing orders as her hand slammed down on her radio. Base-wide alert. This is not a drill. All units. She stopped, because standing 10 feet behind her, just outside the flood of red emergency lights, was a face she knew better than her own. Mara Kincaid, civilian clothes, dark jacket, hair pulled back tight. No rank, no weapon, and yet, something in her eyes told Elise everything was about to go very wrong. "Mara," Elise said, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Get inside. Now." Another explosion. Closer. Too close. Mara didn't flinch. She listened, her head tilted slightly, the way it always had when she was calculating something most people couldn't hear. "That wasn't a mortar," Mara said quietly. Elise stared at her. "How would you—" Hat was shaped, controlled. Whoever fired it knew exactly where it would land. The alarms wailed louder. Elise grabbed Mara's arm. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," Mara replied. "That's why I came." They had been identical once. Same laugh, same stubborn streak, same way of standing when they were angry. Feet planted, chin level, eyes refusing to blink first. But life in uniform changes people differently. Elise had stayed. She believed in structure, in fixing broken systems from the inside. She rose carefully, methodically. Logistics, operations, command track. She trusted rules, even when they bent. Mara had gone to war. 3 deployments, 2 confirmed sniper tours, 1 medical evacuation that ended her career and quietly buried her name in paperwork no one read. Officially, she was medically retired. Unofficially, she was inconvenient. Fort Redstone was not a place for inconvenient people. As they moved quickly through the corridor toward the nearest hardened structure, Elise's voice dropped. "I told you not to come tonight." Mara kept pace easily. "You said the same thing the last 3 times. This base is different," Elise said. "There's pressure, command interference, contractors." Mara glanced at a pair of men sprinting past them. Unmarked uniforms, rifles carried too casually. Her jaw tightened. "Those aren't ours." Elise slowed. "What?" "Those men don't move like soldiers," Mara said. "They move like assets." Another explosion rocked the motor pool. Gunfire followed, not from the perimeter, from inside the wire. Elise stopped walking. "No," she whispered. Mara turned to her fully now. "Elise," she said gently, "your base is compromised." The public address system crackled to life. A familiar voice cut through the chaos. Calm, controlled, rehearsed. "This is Colonel Hargreave. All personnel, stand down. This is a controlled internal security operation. Remain in your assigned locations." Elise felt the words hit her chest like cold water. Controlled, internal security operation. Mara closed her eyes for just a second. "That's the lie," she said. Elise shook her head. "Colonel Hargreave wouldn't—" Gunfire erupted at the far end of the hall. A soldier screamed. Mara pulled Elise behind a concrete support as bullets chewed into the wall where they'd been standing seconds earlier. The shooters moved with discipline. Professional, suppressed weapons, clean spacing. "Elise," Mara said, her voice deadly calm. "This isn't an attack." "Then what is it?" "It's a takeover." A squad rounded the corner. 4 men, rifles up, optics glowing faintly red. They wore no unit patches. One of them stepped forward. "Captain Kincaid," he said, recognizing Elise instantly. "Command wants you escorted to operations." His tone was polite. That was worse. Elise straightened, instinct pulling her back into officer posture. "What's your unit designation?" she asked. The man smiled thinly. "Ma'am, with respect, This is above your clearance. Mara stepped forward. She's not going anywhere. The man looked at her for the first time. And you are? Mara met his gaze evenly, someone who recognizes a bad op. The rifle came up, Mara moved first. The moment was violent and fast and terrifyingly precise. She struck the rifle aside, drove her elbow into the man's throat, twisted, and sent him crashing into the wall. Before the others could react, she was already inside their line, using their own momentum against them. 3 seconds. That's all it took. When it was over, 2 men were unconscious. One was disarmed and bleeding, and the fourth had fled down the corridor shouting into his radio. Elise stared at her sister, breathing hard. "You said you were done," Elise whispered. Mara wiped blood from her knuckles. "I said I was tired." They ran. Smoke filled the lower levels. Emergency lights strobed like a failing heartbeat. Soldiers shouted conflicting orders, some obeying Hargreaves' broadcast, others clearly realizing something was wrong. Mara navigated by instinct, pulling Elise through service corridors and maintenance access points. "You've been here before," Elise said. "Years ago," Mara replied. "Long enough to learn where secrets hide." They reached the armory. The heavy steel door stood ajar. Elise stopped cold. "That's impossible," she said. "I personally verified lock status before." Mara crouched, inspecting the hinge. "It was opened from inside," she said. "With authorization." They stepped inside. Weapon racks stood half empty, not looted, selected. Then Mara saw it. A long rifle case, open on the central table. She didn't breathe. She didn't blink. Elise followed her gaze. Inside lay a rifle that should not exist. Customized stock, familiar wear patterns. A scope adjusted precisely to Mara's eye relief. Her rifle, the M2010 she'd carried through dust storms and moonless nights, the one she'd been forced to surrender. Serial number intact. Someone had planned this. Someone had expected her. Mara slowly reached out and lifted it. The weight settled into her hands like a memory returning home. Elise's voice trembled. "They knew you'd come." Mara checked the chamber. "Yes," she said softly. "And they made a mistake. By 02:41 hours, Fort Redstone was no longer following its own rules. The alarms still screamed, but no one trusted them anymore. Orders overlapped. Radios crackled with half commands and sudden silences. Soldiers moved because training told them to move, not because anyone above them was making sense. From the outside, the base still looked intact. From the inside, it was coming apart along invisible fault lines that had been there for months. Elise felt it as she followed Mara up the narrow stairwell toward the maintenance roof access. Every step felt heavier than the last. Not from fear, but from the realization that the structure she'd trusted her entire adult life was lying to her. "How long?" Elise asked quietly. Mara paused at the landing, listening to distant gunfire echo across concrete. "How long what? How long has this been building?" Mara looked back at her twin sister. Really looked this time. "Longer than you think," she said. Shorter than they hoped. Elise had noticed things before tonight. Requisition orders rerouted without explanation. Security audits delayed, then quietly canceled. Civilian contractors with access levels that didn't align with their job titles. Every time she raised concerns, the answers were smooth. Need to know. Joint tasking. Above your pay grade. She'd accepted it because that's what good officers did. They trusted the chain. They didn't assume betrayal where incompetence could explain it. Now that trust felt naive. They reached the roof access door. Mara eased it open inch by inch, scanning before stepping out. The night air was cold, sharp, filled with the smell of burning fuel and scorched concrete. From here, the base spread out beneath them, floodlights flickering, vehicles abandoned mid-turn, groups of soldiers clustering around leaders they believed in, and others gathering around men they didn't know. "Look," Mara whispered. Elise followed her gaze. Unmarked trucks near the communications hub, antennas being manually rerouted, power relays under armed guard, not by MPs, but by the same patchless contractors. "That sector is restricted," Elise said automatically. "Even I can't authorize." "That's the point," Mara replied. "You can't, but someone did." Through the rifle scope, the world narrowed. Mara hadn't realized how much she'd missed this clarity, the way chaos became geometry, angles and distance and breadth. She didn't fire. Not yet. She watched. The contractors moved in disciplined patterns, but not military doctrine. Private sector tactics, efficient, profit-driven, unconcerned with collateral as long as objectives were met. They weren't here to destroy the base. They were here to own it. Elise, Mara said quietly. This is asset seizure. That's insane, Elise replied. This is a U.S. installation. Mara adjusted the scope slightly. So was the airfield in Kandahar, she said. Until it wasn't. Elise swallowed. Why here? Mara exhaled slowly. Because Fort Redstone controls logistics routing for 3 regional commands: fuel, drones, satellite uplinks. Whoever controls this base can blind entire task forces without firing a shot. Elise felt sick, and Colonel Hargreave? Mara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pointed. Across the base, lights flickered on in the command building's upper level. A familiar silhouette moved behind the glass. Hargreave wasn't hiding. He was overseeing. They moved again, carefully, methodically, down service ladders and through maintenance corridors that smelled of oil and dust. Mara led without hesitation. You memorized this place, Elise said. No, Mara replied. I memorized how bases are built when they expect inspections instead of betrayal. They reached a secure data room adjacent to operations. The door keypad was disabled, forced open electronically, not physically. Inside, servers hummed softly, untouched by the chaos outside. Elise went straight to the terminal. What are you doing? Mara asked. Finding proof, Elise said, fingers flying across the keys. If I'm going to countermand a colonel, I need something that survives court-martial. The screen flickered. Encrypted files surfaced, hidden directories masked as logistics backups. Mara watched Elise's face pale as she opened the first one. Transfer authorizations, private shell companies, contractor payments routed through defense sub-budgets, and then the timestamps. All signed by Hargreave, Elise whispered. Over months. Mara leaned in. Scroll, Elise did one file sat at the bottom. Elise clicked it. The document listed names. Officers flagged as unreliable, including hers. Elise stared at the screen. He planned for me to resist, she said. Mara nodded. And now, he's accelerating. The PA crackled again. Hargreave's voice, sharper now. All personnel are ordered to stand down immediately. Any armed resistance will be treated as hostile. Elise clenched her jaw. That order is illegal. Mara met her eyes. Then you have to say it. Elise hesitated. This was the line. If she crossed it, she wouldn't just be challenging a superior officer. She'd be tearing the illusion of unity in half. Soldiers would have to choose who to believe, her career, her oath. Her sister stood beside her, silent, steady, trusting her to decide. Elise keyed her radio. All units, this is Captain Elise Kincaid, she said, her voice calm despite her racing heart. Colonel Hargreave's orders are not lawful. The base is under internal threat. Any personnel receiving conflicting commands, verify source and follow defensive protocol Delta. This is not a drill. Silence followed. Then, copy that, Captain, a voice replied. Another, then several more. The lie was breaking. Mara settled into position again, rifle braced. Below, Hargreave's men realized the tide was shifting. Orders turned frantic. Contractors moved to secure exits instead of assets. Now, Elise said, Mara fired. Not to kill. She took out a vehicle engine block, then a power junction, then a rooftop antenna. Each shot echoed like punctuation in a sentence that had been waiting to be spoken. The base lights stabilized under emergency power. Communications rerouted through loyal channels. For the first time since the first explosion, Fort Redstone began to fight back. Elise watched soldiers regroup under her commands, young faces lit by firelight and fear, trusting her because she sounded like she knew what she was doing. She did know, but she also knew what this would cost. After tonight, she said quietly to Mara, they'll investigate everything. Mara chambered another round. They should. My name will be dragged through it. Mara smiled faintly. You were always braver than me, she said. Elise shook her head. No, she replied. I just stayed long enough to matter. At 3:09 hours, Fort Redstone split in two. Not physically, though fires burned and concrete bled smoke, but morally, invisibly. The way institutions fracture when authority no longer aligns with legitimacy. For decades, soldiers had been taught one sacred principle: the chain of command is everything, but no one ever taught them what to do when the chain became a noose. Private First Class Aaron Vega crouched behind a HESCO barrier near the communications hub, rifle tight to his shoulder, heart slamming so hard he could feel it in his teeth. Two voices filled his headset. One was Colonel Hargreave, measured, furious, promising consequences. The other was Captain Elise Kincaid, steady, urgent, speaking like someone who knew exactly what was at stake. Vega was 19. This was his first real emergency. His squad leader looked at him, eyes wide. "What do we do?" the sergeant asked. Not as a test, but as a plea. Vega thought of training videos, of oath ceremonies, of the words "defend the Constitution, not obey any man wearing eagles." Then he saw it. Contractors forcing two unarmed techs to their knees near the satellite uplink. No insignia, no legal authority. Vega swallowed. "We cover the captain," he said. The sergeant nodded once, and just like that, the base made its choice. One soldier at a time. Mara watched the shift happen through her scope. You could always tell when a battlefield turned, not by explosions, but by hesitation. The attackers slowed. They checked corners twice. They stopped advancing and started reacting. She adjusted her position slightly, using a ventilation housing for cover. "Elise," she said into the radio, "your people are holding." Elise exhaled, relief she didn't have time to acknowledge. "Then we keep them alive," she replied. Mara's finger rested against the trigger. Below, a contractor raised his weapon toward a cluster of soldiers pinned near the fuel depot. Mara didn't hesitate. The shot was clean. Center mass. The man dropped. It was the first life she took that night. Mara closed one eye. "I'm back," she whispered, not with pride, but with acceptance. Inside the command building, Colonel Hargreave watched the situation unravel on half-functional screens. "What do you mean they're refusing orders?" he snapped. A contractor hesitated. "They're responding to Captain Kincaid, sir. She's assumed operational control." Hargreave slammed his fist into the desk. "She doesn't have the authority." Another screen flickered. A rooftop camera feed cut out, then returned, angled slightly differently. Hargreave stared. He knew that angle. His blood went cold. "Find the sniper," he said quietly. Now, they came for Mara with discipline and fury. Two teams, one from the east stairwell, one from the west, moving carefully, checking rooftops, scanning for muzzle flash. Mara sensed it before Elise warned her. "Movement," Elise said. "They're hunting you." Mara adjusted her breathing. "Good," she replied. "That means they aren't hunting you." She shifted positions, rolling, crawling, staying low. Every movement calculated. She left the empty rifle case in one spot, then reappeared 30 meters away. A contractor crested the roofline. Mara waited until he committed, then fired. Another man fell. The others scattered. Professional fear, the most dangerous kind. Elise stood in the operations center, surrounded by soldiers who looked to her now, not because of rank alone, but because she hadn't lied to them. Maps glowed. Radios chirped. Status boards updated in real time. "We need to isolate the command building," Elise said. "No more reinforcements for Hargreave." An NCO nodded. "Already happening, ma'am. Motor pool secured, drone uplinks rerouted." Elise felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Confidence. Not the brittle kind that came from authority, but the earned kind that came from responsibility. She keyed the base-wide channel. "All units," she said. "We hold positions. We protect each other. We do not escalate unless necessary. This ends with accountability, not revenge." Somewhere on the base, a young soldier lowered his rifle slightly. Hargreave made one final broadcast. "This is Colonel Hargreave," he said, voice sharp with desperation. "Any personnel aiding Captain Kincaid are committing mutiny. You will be court-martialed." Elise listened, then responded. "This is Captain Elise Kincaid," she said. "The Colonel's orders violate lawful command authority. I am assuming temporary control under emergency statute. Any personnel wishing to stand down will be protected. This ends now." The silence afterward was profound. Then radios across the base clicked in unison. Copy, understood, standing by. The chain of command didn't snap. It reformed, around truth. Mara felt it before she saw it, a change in the air. She rolled, too late. The round grazed her shoulder, tearing through flesh and spinning her hard against the concrete. Pain flared hot and immediate. "Damn it," she hissed. A sniper. Good one. She pressed her shoulder, teeth clenched, forcing herself to breathe through it. "Elise," she said calmly. "They've got overwatch on the south tower." Elise's voice sharpened. "You're hit, still breathing," Mara replied. "Focus." Mara scanned, ignoring the pain. Letting training override instinct, she found him, barely visible, perfectly camouflaged, a mirror of herself. She waited, then fired. The enemy sniper went still. Mara lay back, staring at the sky, blood seeping into concrete. "I forgot how quiet it gets," she murmured. By 0347 hours, resistance collapsed. Contractors surrendered or fled. Soldiers secured the command building. Hargreave barricaded himself in his office. Elise approached the door, weapon low but ready. "Colonel," she called out, "it's over." Silence. Then laughter, thin, bitter. "You think this ends with me?" Hargreave said through the door. "You have no idea how deep this goes." Elise closed her eyes. "Maybe not," she said, "but it ends with you tonight." The door opened. He stepped out, unarmed, furious, defeated. Soldiers moved in. Handcuffs clicked shut. They found Mara on the rooftop at dawn. Elise ran the last few steps, dropping to her knees beside her sister. "You idiot," Elise whispered, pressing bandages against the wound. "You promised you were done." Mara smiled weakly. "I lied," she said. "But you didn't." Elise laughed. A broken, relieved sound. "You held the line," Elise said. Mara shook her head. "No," she replied. "You did." By the time the sun broke the horizon, Fort Redstone looked like a place that had survived something it wasn't meant to. Smoke drifted low over the motor pool. Emergency vehicles sat where they'd been abandoned mid-crisis. Soldiers moved slowly now, not from exhaustion alone, but from the strange quiet that follows violence, when adrenaline drains away and reality rushes back in. Mara lay on a gurney in the medical bay, staring at the ceiling tiles. They were the same everywhere. Government issue, off-white, cracked at the corners. She'd stared at ceilings like this in Kandahar, Bagram, Ramstein, places where pain meant survival and survival always came with questions. A corpsman leaned over her shoulder. "You're lucky," he said. "Missed bone, missed artery." Mara smiled faintly. "I usually am." Across the room, Elise stood with her back to the wall, arms folded tight across her chest. Her uniform was streaked with soot and dried blood. Not all of it hers. She hadn't slept, hadn't sat down. She looked older than she had 24 hours earlier, but she also looked unbroken. Their eyes met. "You didn't have to do that," Elise said quietly. Mara turned her head slightly. "Neither did you." By 0600 hours, investigators arrived, not MPs, not CID, men and women in civilian suits with military posture, credentials flashed too quickly to read. They spoke softly, they asked precise questions, they took hard drives and sealed rooms. Elise watched them from the command hallway. "This is bigger than Hargreave," she said under her breath. Mara, her arm now immobilized in a sling, stood beside her. "I told you," she replied. "He was a node, not the network." One of the investigators approached Elise. "Captain Kincaid," he said, "you're to remain available for questioning. Effective immediately, you're relieved of operational command." Elise nodded once. "Understood." As he walked away, Elise exhaled slowly. "That's it," she said. "This is where they start carving the story into something easier to swallow." Mara glanced at her. "You did the right thing." Elise didn't answer right away. "Doing the right thing doesn't always mean they let you keep your career," she said. Mara smiled sadly. "Doing the wrong thing always costs more." The investigators didn't plan to speak to Mara. At first, she wasn't on the base roster. She wasn't in uniform. Officially, she was just a visiting civilian injured during an internal security incident. Then someone ran the rifle serial number, and the past came knocking. A woman in a dark blazer entered the medical bay, badge clipped neatly at her waist. "Mara Kincaid," she said. "Former Staff Sergeant, United States Army." Mara closed her eyes briefly. "Retired," she replied. The woman nodded. "Yes, medically, after Operation Black Channel." Elise stiffened. She'd never heard that name before. The investigator continued. "You were part of a sniper team that conducted classified Overwatch missions for joint task forces. Your after-action reports were problematic." Mara opened her eyes. "I reported what happened," she said evenly. "And that," the woman replied, "is exactly why we're here." They moved Mara to a private room. Elise stood outside, listening through the half-open door as the past unfolded, piece by piece, like shrapnel working its way out of an old wound. Operation Black Channel, a covert interdiction mission meant to eliminate a high-value arms broker operating under diplomatic cover. The order had come down clean. Too clean. Mara's team had eyes on the target for 3 days. They'd identified civilians nearby, children, a family living above the storefront. Mara had requested delay. Denied. She'd requested alternate angles. Denied. Then the order had changed. "Take the shot," the investigator said quietly, "or the target escapes." Mara's voice remained flat. "I took the shot," she said. "The target dropped. So did the building's power." She paused, and then the secondary explosions started. Unplanned. Unreported. Weapons stockpiled beneath the structure. The blast killed the family upstairs. Mara had included everything in her report. The weapons, the civilians, the unauthorized escalation. The response had been swift. Her team was reassigned. Her medical file was reopened. Her clearance was quietly downgraded. She was retired within 6 months. "Someone needed silence," Mara said. "I didn't give it to them." Elise stepped into the room. The investigator nodded. "So were 3 others," she replied. "All connected to private contractors operating with partial military oversight." Elise felt the pieces align. Later that evening, Elise sat alone in an empty briefing room. Her career hung in limbo. Her command authority gone. Her future uncertain. She replayed every decision, every order, every moment she'd chosen to trust the system. A knock sounded at the door. Mara stepped in, pale but steady. "You always did this," Mara said. "Second-guessing after the fight." Elise gave a tired smile. "I stayed," she said. "You left." "I survived," Mara replied gently. "You're still surviving." Elise looked at her. "They're going to bury this," she said. "Maybe not tonight. Maybe not publicly. But they'll try." Mara nodded. "Then don't let them." Elise shook her head. "I don't have your kind of leverage." Mara stepped closer. "Yes," she said. "You do." Mara reached into her jacket and pulled out a small, battered data drive. "I didn't just shoot that night," she said. "I recorded satellite feeds, contractor comms, Hargreaves' direct orders, captured cleanly, unmistakably." Elise stared. "This could burn careers," she said. Mara met her gaze. "It could save lives." Elise closed her eyes. This was it. Not the firefight. Not the gunshots. This choice. She took the drive. "I won't let this disappear," she said. Mara smiled. Proud, tired, relieved. "I know," she replied. "That's why I came." By the 3rd day after the ambush, Fort Redstone had returned to something resembling normal. That was the most unsettling part. The debris was cleared. Burn marks painted over. Temporary fencing replaced shattered barriers. Flags still flew. Formation still happened at dawn. Orders still moved down channels that sounded calm and professional. But beneath it all, something poisonous lingered. Truth doesn't explode when it surfaces. It pressurizes, and pressure always looks for a weak point. Elise sat alone in an interview room with no windows and too much light. Across from her sat 3 people. 1 wore a uniform. 2 didn't. "Captain Kincaid," the man in uniform said, "you are aware that your actions placed the installation at significant risk." Elise met his eyes. My actions prevented the installation from being seized, she replied. One of the civilians leaned forward. You countermanded a superior officer during an active crisis. Yes. Do you understand the precedent that sets? Elise nodded. I understand the oath I swore. The room went quiet. That was the moment Elise knew this wasn't about what happened that night. It was about control. Outside the room, a version of events was already being shaped. Press briefings used careful language. An internal security incident was resolved swiftly through decisive leadership. No names, no mention of contractors, no mention of Hargreaves' contingency files. Hargreave himself was moved, not arrested. Relieved, pending review. Escorted to an off-base facility that didn't appear on any public registry. Mara watched the news feed from a quiet corner of the base hospital. They're narrowing it, she said to Elise later, trimming the truth down to something manageable. Elise sat beside her, exhausted. They always do. And if you push? Elise didn't answer, because she knew what pushing meant. The warning came at night, not officially. A knock on Elise's temporary quarters, soft, precise. When she opened the door, a senior officer stood there, someone she'd admired once. I'm not here in any official capacity, he said quietly. Elise stepped aside. They sat. He didn't waste time. You're being positioned, he said. Not as a hero, as a liability. Elise's throat tightened. For what? For knowing too much, he replied. And for refusing to stay quiet. Elise thought of the drive in her pocket. What happens if I don't? The officer hesitated. Your career ends, he said. Best case. Elise nodded. And the worst? He stood. You already know. Mara didn't need anyone to explain it to her. She'd lived it. You give them that drive, Mara said later, and they'll sanitize it. They can't erase it, Elise replied. No, Mara said. But they can isolate you until no one listens. Elise looked at her sister. Then what do we do? Mara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, we widen the circle. Elise requested a formal hearing. Public. Recorded. Not through her immediate command, but through oversight channels rarely used except when things had already gone very wrong. It was a gamble. The response came slower than she liked. Then, approved, limited scope, controlled audience, still dangerous, still real. Mara watched Elise prepare, organizing files, rehearsing testimony, steadying herself like she was about to step into a firefight without armor. You don't have to do this, Mara said. Elise shook her head. If I don't, she replied, someone else will end up like you. The room was large, cold, formal, flags, emblems, faces trained to reveal nothing. Elise took her seat. She spoke clearly. She laid out the timeline. The unauthorized contractors, the internal resistance protocol, the illegal orders. Then she produced the drive. This contains unedited recordings, she said. If I'm wrong, you'll know. If I'm right, then what happened at Fort Redstone was not an anomaly. It was a warning. Murmurs spread. One of the panel members leaned forward. Captain, he said, are you prepared for the consequences of making these allegations? Elise didn't look away. I already paid them, she said. I'm just asking you to look. They didn't respond immediately. Instead, Elise was suspended, administrative, non-punitive, her access revoked, her future uncertain. Mara found her that night sitting on the steps outside the barracks, staring at nothing. Did I fail? Elise asked quietly. Mara sat beside her. No, she said. You did something harder than winning, Elise swallowed, which is standing still while the truth catches up. 2 weeks later, the first leak appeared, not from Elise, not from Mara, from inside the system. Redacted documents surfaced, audio clips followed. A pattern emerged too clear to ignore. Congressional inquiries began quietly, then loudly. The narrative broke. Hargreaves' name appeared in headlines. So did others. Elise watched from a distance as the truth finally moved faster than the cover-up. She felt no triumph, only relief. Mara packed her bag. You leaving? Elise asked. Yes. Where? Mara smiled faintly. Somewhere quiet. They stood in the early morning light. You saved this place, Elise said. Mara shook her head. No, she replied. You did. I just reminded you who you were. They hugged, long, wordless. The dawn came quietly. No alarms, no gunfire, no shouted orders slicing through the air. Just light, slow and honest, spreading across Fort Redstone, touching the tops of buildings, the flagpole at the center of the parade ground, the places where men and women had stood their ground when the rules failed them. For the first time in weeks, the base breathed, and so did Elise Kincaid. The reckoning didn't come with handcuffs at first. It came with paperwork, official letters, formal language, words like review, oversight, pending reassignment, careers paused, authorities suspended, entire departments audited. Colonel Hargreave was no longer referred to as Colonel, he became Subject H. Others followed. Names Elise recognized, names she didn't. Some resigned quietly, some fought. Some vanished into the administrative fog that swallows scandals when institutions want to pretend they never happened. But this time, the fog didn't hold, because the truth hadn't stayed inside Fort Redstone. It had escaped. Elise's Wait-Alize was placed on administrative leave, not charged, not cleared, just waiting. Waiting is a special kind of punishment for soldiers. She ran every morning at first light, the same route around the perimeter fence, watching the desert wake up. She cleaned her gear, though she wasn't using it. She wrote reports no one had asked for, habits refusing to die. Some nights she questioned herself. Had she gone too far? Had she broken something she couldn't repair? But then she'd remember the look on the faces of the young soldiers who'd followed her orders, not because they had to, but because they trusted her, and the doubt would quiet. The call came on a Thursday. Short, formal. Captain Kincaid, report to command at 0900, no tone. No hints. Elise dressed carefully. Not perfectly. She wore her uniform the way she always had. Clean, correct, honest. Inside the command building, the room felt different. Lighter. New faces sat where old ones used to be. A general she'd never met before stood as she entered. "Captain," he said, "thank you for coming." She stood at attention. "At ease," he said. That alone told her everything. "You were placed in an impossible position," the general said. "You chose correctly." Elise said nothing. "Your actions prevented the illegal seizure of a U.S. installation," he continued. "They also exposed systemic failures we are still addressing." He paused. "Your career survived because you upheld the oath, not despite it." Elise felt something loosen in her chest. "You are hereby reinstated," he said. "With commendation." She blinked. "There will be no press conference," he added. "No medals, no speeches." She nodded. "That's acceptable," she said. The general smiled faintly. "Of course it is," he replied. "It always was." Mara was already gone. No forwarding address, no phone number that worked longer than a week, just a postcard that arrived a month later. A picture of a quiet road cutting through trees, still breathing, still watching the horizon. Elise kept it in her desk. The base changed, not dramatically, subtly. Oversight became real. Contractors were vetted or removed. Young officers asked harder questions, and sometimes late at night, Elise would walk the same rooftop where Mara had lain bleeding and calm under the stars. She'd look out over the base and feel something close to peace, not pride, responsibility. Years later, Elise would be asked about that night. Not in interviews, not in classrooms, but by a young lieutenant standing exactly where she once stood, uncertain, loyal, afraid of doing the wrong thing. "What do you do?" he asked. "When the orders don't feel right." Elise thought of her sister, of a rifle that never should have been there, of a moment when silence would have been easier. And she answered simply, "You remember who the oath was for. Institutions survive on obedience, but they endure because of courage. When systems fail, it is not rank or power that saves them, but individuals willing to stand still, speak clearly, and accept the cost of truth. Because sometimes, the most powerful weapon on a battlefield is the refusal to look away.